when I asked people, where does good chocolate come from? And people would always say, oh, Switzerland, Belgium, France are where good chocolate comes from. I said, Switzerland, of course, they make good chocolate. But I said, how many cocoa trees grow in Zurich? And the answer, of course, is 0. No cocoa trees grow in Zurich.
You are listening to NIMDA Talk.
Happy to come your way again. I'm really excited about today's conversation. I have my friend here with me to talk about something really interesting. I would like him to introduce himself.
My name is Stephen Wallace, and I am the founder and president of the Omanhene Cocoa Bean Company. And we were the first company to do export quality bean to bar chocolate manufactured in Ghana and exported to the United States.
Oh, thanks, Steve, for joining us today. I'm really glad that we can get the opportunity to hear your story. And I know you said your company is called Omanhene. Why the name Omanhene? Why did you choose that name?
Well, for those of your listeners who do not speak Twi, the West African language, it is a honorific title, and it refers to, of course, in Ghana there are, sort of village chiefs or kings, leaders, regional ones, but the paramount leader, the paramount king, or chief, their title is the Omanhene. And so and to this day, the Omanhene is the repository of moral and ethical authority. And so I wanted our company and our chocolate and our products to reflect the moral and ethical authority of traditional Ghana.
That's a very interesting concept that in essence, you are linking chocolate to something much, much bigger. From your name, I know you are not from Ghana, like you are not originally from Ghana. So how did this whole Omanhene chocolate endeavor come about? Did you happen to go to Ghana on holidays? Is there a story there? Would you want to kind of share a little bit about your relationship with Ghana and by extension chocolate?
Sure. I've had sort of various touch points with West Africa. And it's really almost life and good fortune steering me towards West Africa. And once in 6th grade, I was sick on the day they assigned countries, when everyone had to do a book report on countries. And all the kids that were of Norwegian or German descent wanted Norway or Sweden or Germany or Italy or Ireland. And I was sick, and so they gave me Liberia and Sierra Leone, because no one at that time wanted to do those countries. And I did my book report, found that part of the world fascinating. And then when I was 16, I won an AFS scholarship to study abroad. So at the age of 16, I went from southeast Wisconsin to Sunyani, Ghana, on a foreign exchange and spent 12 weeks in Ghana. And that was the genesis of everything that's come afterwards. Ghana moved me. I've got great affection for the country and wanted to go back with some purpose, so started a company there.
Okay, and so you are originally from southern Wisconsin. Would you mind telling us a little bit about your own background, a little bit about your childhood and how your education process went when you were young?
Sure. So I lived in a suburb of Milwaukee, and it had a very active sort of foreign exchange activity there. So they would host 5 students a year, and our family hosted a student. We just thought it was a way to my parents were very internationalist and sort of globalist in outlook. They just thought the world, they were trying to teach my brother and I that I think the world was full of possibility. It could be a kind and welcoming place, and that there were people all over the world. I sort of grew up in the 1960s. It was not that long after the founding of the United Nations, and the sort of concept of it's a small world, and the great diversity and richness of the world was perceived as valuable, as opposed to a threat or something to be scared of. And so my parents just raised us with this sort of very welcoming outlook, and we welcomed foreign students into our house. And it was this community where people had to walk home. There was no busing. So at lunch hour, you had to walk home to get your lunch. And we lived right across the street from the high school. So my mother she was a stay-at-home mom. She would put a big spread together for lunch, and she would welcome all the foreign students. So when I'd come home for lunch, I never really knew who would be at my kitchen table having lunch. Then we'd all walk back to school. So from that, we just had kind of a very wonderful and international upbringing. Though, the population of this suburb was not particularly diverse at that time in the early 1960s. When I think about it, there were a handful of families of color. So it was really not particularly racially diverse at all. But it was through these foreign exchange experiences that I think I saw a bigger world.
Thank you. I really like the point you made about the importance of a small worldview, like having, as all of us think about the world as a common place, a common platform for people of different backgrounds and different sorts of diversity. When you went to Ghana, you are a young boy, maybe 16 years, a teenager from southern Wisconsin. How was the experience like?
Well, so remember, this was before the internet. This was before cell phones, of course. So when I found out, the way this worked with AFS, I found out I won the scholarship, but I didn't know what country I would be sent to. And the deal was you would be happy to go to any country. They picked you on your capacity for sort of intercultural exchange. And I desperately wanted to go to Africa. As I said, I'd been doing book reports on it. And I think deep down I felt that Europe was always going to be there. And I could get myself to Europe, but I didn't know how to get myself to Africa. And that seemed like, at 16, the great adventure. Mm-hmm. So I felt like I won the lottery. I found out I was going to Ghana. I had to go to the World Book Encyclopedia. Under G, pulled the volume, opened it up, and had to look exactly where Ghana was. I knew vaguely, but not intimately. Started reading up about it, reading the fact that it had been part of a British colony. It had been the Gold Coast. It was part of the old Ghana Empire, which had a footprint throughout most of North Africa, or West Africa, in moving north even. So it was a great adventure. We had a coup that summer, so I felt like I was getting all the excitement that a young person in their sort of naivete may think about, that kind of great adventure. And I think the wonderful thing to reflect back on is I went during the coup years, when Ghana was ruled by military dictators. The economy was stagnant. It was very difficult. There was not a lot of variety of food. It was, for a lot of people, hand to mouth. I lived with a very traditional family. Sunyani was about an 11 or 12-hour bus ride from the capital city of Accra. So I had this, I think, quintessentially wonderful, a bit of a rural Ghanaian experience that I just thought was singular. And it changed my outlook on life. It made me, we can talk about it in all the ways it did, but it really set me on a path that made it clear to me Ghana was always going to play a role for the rest of my days.
I know that most of my listeners, myself inclusive, will find it difficult to conceptualize a world without technology as we know it in this era and all the communicational tools that we have. But I think in the absence of that is that opportunity for that social interaction with people and to experience things in a very quintessential way, like you said. How did that trip to Ghana, how did that change to that sort of love story with chocolate? I say love story because for most of us, chocolate is the symbolism for love. And how did that relationship, how did that change happen? How did you move from a 16-year-old to an entrepreneur in the realm of chocolate making? Are you from a family of chefs?
Well, I'm not professional chefs, but I did grow up in a family of people who love to cook and were very comfortable in the kitchen.
Okay.
So I grew up with mother and grandmother who were terrific chefs. So my mother, when we were little kids, she just put out pots and pans, and that's what we'd play with instead of blocks or toys necessarily. And we could spill water, and we could put rice from one bowl to the other. Not that we were cooking, but we pretended. So we pretended we were cooking.
Okay.
And we had great imagination. And my mother was always a big one. She didn't consider making a mess. So she was baking. She'd put us on a chair. She'd put a apron around us or a dish towel around our necks, and then we could just help measure. And of course, we'd spill, but that was part of the fun. So I always felt comfortable in the kitchen. I looked around Ghana at the time because I was thinking of how do I go back to Ghana? How do I make it part of my life? And I thought about the foreign service, but the challenge of that was you don't get to pick the country you want to go. And even if I were lucky enough to be posted to Ghana, it would only be for 2 or 3 years because they like to rotate people. And I, at a relatively young age, I think appreciated that if I wanted to live in Ghana or do something or be a part of it, I had to invest years in Ghana. I couldn't just go there for a summer and leave, or go for a year and try a business and then leave. That it would take many years, and that turned out to be correct. So I looked around, and Ghana at that time, really was known for maybe 4 things. It was the old Gold Coast, so it had gold, diamonds, it had manganese, which gets smelted into alumina, which becomes aluminum. So it had this aluminum industry. Now, gold and diamonds are part of cartels. There was no way I was going to play much of a role in that. Aluminum smelting was a $1 billion endeavor, very technical. I had no capacity for that. But Ghana grew cocoa. And not only did it grow cocoa, it grows what's considered by many some of the finest cocoa in the world. And indeed, Ghanaian cocoa often gets several $100s more a metric ton over the benchmark Ivoirian benchmark ton of cocoa. So Ghana cocoa is considered a premium cocoa. It fetches a premium on world commodity markets. And since I grew up in a family of people who love to cook, I said, why don't I look at the cocoa sector? And that's what happened. But Albert, I got to go back to something you said because it was fascinating about the difference in technology. And I think the inability, now, when I was there was no really even landline phones. You had to book a call days in advance, and the electricity didn't work oftentimes. And you get a letter once. It took 4 weeks for a letter, and people would write out longhand letters. But I think what it did is it made you reflective. I think today, if you have an experience, the first thing you do is you tweet about it or you share it on social media. You text people, and there's an immediate reaction that's not very, I'm afraid it's not very self-reflective. So if I would have a good day or a bad day, I would have to deal with it for days or maybe even weeks, come to some conclusion, reconcile my thoughts, my either euphoria or my frustration, because it wasn't all easy, and then reconcile myself and move on. And I think if we tend to live in this world that's so reactive, everyone, I guess, feels they're entitled to give their immediate reaction. And in that situation, especially being so remote from family and high school friends, I couldn't pick up the phone. I could write them, but I would never hear back for 4 to 8 weeks. So I had to, I found the joys of solitary engagement with my own thoughts and thinking about life. And I think people miss that. And I really, I would wish my children and your students especially could enjoy the joys of reflection in a solitary life for some parts of their day.
That's so well said. And so, in, along the theme of reflection, if you look at the Omanhene story, um, in your view, what are some of the key successes and challenges that that come to mind? Because I think that for most people, is perhaps creating that what I call the ideation pipeline, where you transform an idea from just a thought or a perception to some type of a tangible, profitable venture. So, looking back in the spirit of reflection, looking back, what are some of the key successes and challenges that you encountered during the process of translating Omanhene from just an idea to a venture?
Well, I have to say that, and in life, maybe you only get two or three, if you're lucky, good ideas. And the ideation process was to go back to Ghana and work, not for a charity, not for an NGO, not for the diplomatic corps. But I was beginning I had a couple of benchmarks. One, I saw that at that time, Ghana's employment was about 85% in the public sector. So 85% of the people worked for the government, which is all well and good, but that left only 15% of largely farmers of a private sector. And I thought, I just came from a small business background. I wasn't a person who had any experience with very large companies. So I thought, I took stock of my skills and my shortcomings. And my skill was in small business. I'd worked in kind of small businesses, often some startup ventures. So I was comfortable with that degree of uncertainty. And when I looked around and I said, all right, there's not, I can't do gold, I can't do diamonds, I can't do aluminum, but cocoa, what do you do with cocoa? And I wasn't a farmer. I didn't come from an agricultural background, but I do know that I like being in a kitchen. And almost immediately, I reflected on Ghana controls the most important piece of the whole cocoa value chain, which is the growing of the cocoa, and was beginning to do some first stage processing in country, turning the cocoa bean into cocoa powder, cocoa liquor, cocoa cake, cocoa butter. But there was really no concerted effort to move up the value chain. And so I looked at countries like Switzerland, who owed so much of their wealth to the manufacture and production of finished chocolate. And I said to myself, when I asked people, where does good chocolate come from? And people would always say, Switzerland, Belgium, France are where good chocolate comes from. I said, Switzerland, of course, they make good chocolate. But I said, how many cocoa trees grow in Zurich? And the answer, of course, is 0. No cocoa trees grow in Zurich. And so isn't it interesting? So before I even really knew the word value chain or had studied it, I was aware of this disconnect between the wealth that a country like Switzerland, for example, derived from cocoa, the cocoa value chain, because they sat atop the value chain, and the importance of Ghana in the cocoa value chain, but they weren't rewarded economically for their importance. They really sat at a bottom rung of the cocoa value chain. And this is the case with most agricultural commodities. They're commodity priced. The price a cocoa farmer gets for his cocoa beans is disconnected from the amount of effort they put in. It has to do with whether there's a drought in Brazil or Venezuela or Ivory Coast. And so supply and demand world events determine the price of cocoa that this cocoa farmer gets. And that seemed a bit unfair on a level. And I thought, well, how can we get Ghana to move up the value chain? Why? If they make the world's finest cocoa, according to the Financial Times. They said Ghana grows the finest cocoa in the world. Why isn't Ghana making the finest chocolate in the world? We can import the machinery wherever it's made. If it's made in the Netherlands or Switzerland, we'll bring it down to Ghana. We'll do sort of American-style branding and recipe development. We'll create a recipe that would have a taste profile that should appeal to European and American consumers. And then we'll sell it for hard currencies, repatriate that back to the factory in Ghana, and then maybe Ghana begins to approach where Switzerland is on the cocoa value chain. So the ideation process, I mean, the idea came from the disconnect between realizing Ghana played a primary role in cocoa, but seemed not to secure the financial benefits and remuneration that they should have when one thought about it from the outside looking in.
And so I like the sense of passion with which you talk about that disconnect, and I think it's really interesting for us to hear that, because a lot of the time these ideas come out of identifying some of these tensions that exist between resource allocation. And what do you say has been some of your key successes and challenges in this endeavor?
Well, we had very quickly, of course, one success is selling your first chocolate bar.
Wow.
And we went out to New York to the largest food show in North America. We set up our little booth. And you have to realize, you walk into the Jacob Javits Convention Center, which is enormous in New York City. And I think at this fancy food show, there's something like 5,000 exhibitors. And places like Hershey's or Nestle's, they have a pavilion. I mean, they have 2-story booths with, fountains and couches and kitchens, and just really marvelous. We had a card table draped, with a tablecloth, and then I bought some fresh flowers, so there was some color, and then our chocolate bars stacked on the table. So to sell the first chocolate bar, the first person that ordered was a little store outside Madison, Wisconsin, a place called Orange Tree Imports. I'll never forget that they placed the first order, and I thought to myself, this is so funny. I had to travel all the way from Wisconsin to New York City. I had to stay in a hotel. I had to rent the booth. We had to do all this work. And the first person that bought was right down the road in Wisconsin.
That's interesting.
Other successes, we very quickly got a lot of press because this was unprecedented. So we were, I think NBC Nightly News did a little something with us. We were in all sorts of Voice of America did a piece that went to something like 93 million people. It was a good story, and I was aware of that. And that made me feel that I should persevere and make the economics and success of the company equal the sort of tantalizing aspects of the story. In some ways, the story was doing better than the company was. But I knew it just would take some patience and how to learn to navigate U.S. retail supply chains and consumer chains and how to find customers and keep them.
One thing that really stands out to me is that deep-seated passion that you have. Beyond that, what would you say are some of the sort of core leadership skills that you have learned from the Omanhene experience? What are some of the key skills that you come to mind that you would want to share with us today?
Well, for me, the skills that I think have been important are patience and a sense that the journey should be enjoyable for its own sake, and you should be learning all the time. I think I felt I'm trying to remember at the very beginning, I'm sure I felt that I wanted two things to happen. I either wanted to be a success pretty quickly. By pretty quickly, 3 or 4 or 5 years. That was my window. Or it would not be a success. It would be a failure. And then I could move on with my life. But one way or the other, I would kind of know where I sat, and there'd be a quick resolution. And the fact is, that's not what happened. We weren't a financial success right at the beginning. It took many years, but we weren't a failure either. And it just, So I was left with this conundrum of having to persevere, which was a lesson, frankly, I learned in Ghana. I saw how people persevered through hardship, and the resourcefulness that seemed to me very characteristic of Ghanaians, and maybe others too. But in Ghana, I just saw how farmers would take an old soup can and they'd cut out tines and they'd turn it into a rake for their gardens. And just this kind of level of unrelenting inventiveness and resourcefulness became my pole star. So I think patience was really something very important. And I have to think, because I talk to students often, as you're in the classroom every day, and a lot of, I think, 20-year-olds believe they can start a company and become a billionaire in a matter of a year and a half, because people do it. There are indeed 20-year-olds that become multimillionaires in a year or two. And that happens, but I think it's in some ways the exception. And if you're in a company merely to build it up and then flip it, I understand that. And I guess I would have loved that choice, but that wasn't my journey, Albert. My journey was, it took a long time to get to the place, and I enjoy running the company. I suppose the rhetorical question would be, well, everyone's got their price. You might sell it someday. Well, maybe, but the truth is I love running it. I get enjoyment from running it and growing it. And it was never take the company, build it, and then sell it and enjoy yourself with the money. It was, could we do this very difficult moving up the value chain? And if we can, how wonderful would that be? And so it continues to be wonderful. So I stick with it.
Thank you. I appreciate your thoughts on that. And so maybe for some of us, it will not be chocolate, maybe to be some other venture. Given your entrepreneurial background, managing small businesses, moving into the chocolate arena, I think one thing that you said that stood out for me a few minutes ago was the fact that most people would have maybe two very good ideas that can be profitable. How, in your opinion, do we push through with those ideas? How do we turn them into profitable ventures? I know you've said pieces of that throughout our conversation, but bringing it together, how do we transform ideas, 2, 3, 1 in our lifetime, to something that will be of a greater benefit to all, or to the communities with which we have affiliation?
It's a great and difficult question. I got an email just last week from a young Ghanaian woman that I met. I gave a speech at the U.S. Embassy in Accra 4 years ago to a group that had been assembled of young entrepreneurs. And she came up afterwards. She was starting a yogurt company. And she was frustrated and didn't think it would go anywhere. And I said, try to be patient. Try to keep it alive as long as you can. And I realize that's difficult because you've got bills to pay. You've got student loans to pay. You've got other things. But if you can just, it doesn't have to make a lot of money, but if you can at least keep the idea alive, keep it there, give it time to ripen. And she wrote back out of the blue last week, and Steve, I'm so glad you told me. It's been 4 years, and I'm now selling at many outlets in Ghana where she considers herself a success. And she is, I think, by any objective criteria and metrics, she's a success. So I was so happy for her. So I think this idea, and it's difficult because especially if you get money from, say, venture investors or angels, a venture investor has an exit strategy. And in the US, it's usually 5 to 7 years. They want to put their money in and exit. Some ideas, I'm convinced, take longer than that to reach fruition. So a lot of good ideas may end in 5 to 7 years because initial investors want their money out. They're going to cut off the funds. They want an exit. So I think part of this is related to how do you fund your business idea? How long can you keep it going without outsiders telling you what to do? In some cases, outsiders will give you wonderful advice and support, but I think you're always on a bit of a of a clicking. There's a little ticking of the clock in the background, tick, 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 tick. At some point, that investor is going to say, enough. I've watched you for 3, 4, 5 years. You're going nowhere. I'm pulling funds. You're done. So these things are, it's difficult. I mean, people say follow your passion, and I think passion is absolutely part of it. But at some point, you have to be clear-eyed, and you may have to pivot your passion into a different endeavor. You may have to pivot your product. And even for us, we've pivoted. We found some of our most profitable products are not the ones I originally thought I'd be making. But you get out in business and you get customers tell you, oh, could you do this with your chocolate? Could you do that with your cocoa? Could you do that? And you listen, if you're smart, to your customers, and they'll sort of steer you where you ought to be. Here's the flavors we really like. Here's the meltability, the melting temperature we really prefer. And then if you can do that, you follow it. So sometimes you have to know when to follow your business plan and when to walk away from it or pivot it or change it or edit it.
Thank you. And so when you look into the crystal ball, I've tried not to look into mine because of COVID and the unexpected changes that we had. But when you look into your crystal ball and look at Omanhene chocolate, what do you see? What do you see in terms of your future growth? What do you see in terms of the future market opportunities? We are perhaps always going to eat chocolate and chocolate products in the bidder world. So what do you see in terms of the future of Omanhene?
Well, I see a very bright future. I'm very excited. I think we can do a lot with product development, all sorts of sort of nutraceutical and food and fortified recipes. I think we will be able to do a lot with traceability, eventually to actually the first mile, so we know where we get our cocoa, but to sort of prove it in a way that a consumer could use. QR codes that would take you right back to the exact farm or that group of farms where that cocoa's production lot came from. That technology is now within our grasp, so we're sort of beginning to experiment with that. So I would hope in the next year we'd be able to roll out something along those lines. So I get very excited about the future of Omanhene. These have been tough. A lot of our customer base has had some difficult economic times, but you're right. I think chocolate is a permissible indulgence. It's not so very expensive that once in a while you can't treat yourself. And so I hope people will continue to feel that way and patronize our chocolate and our hot cocoa mix.
And I think the biggest travesty is the fact that I haven't tasted Omanhene chocolate. So I'll go to my local store to check tonight whether I could indulge. I think I deserve an Omanhene chocolate bar. What do you think, Steve?
I think you do too. Yeah, this is always hard because you try to ship chocolate in the height of summer. It's 85 degrees today, and it melts. So you got to be pretty careful. So we'll certainly do what we can to get you some chocolate up in the Twin Cities area.
Thank you. And do you have any final words? I know we've taken a considerable amount of your time. What are your final thoughts?
Well, I reflect. I'm very grateful today. I think the fact that Ghana came into my life in these kind of unexpected circumstances is one of the great and wonderful mysteries. And so I'm very appreciative of it. I thought maybe I would just read the sort of dedication to my book, and it, I think, expresses to this day how I feel. And I dedicated my book, which, by the way, it's called Obruni and the Chocolate Factory, and Obruni refers to people with light skin, white people. So, and I wrote and dedicated the book to the people of the Republic of Ghana, who in ways both modest and magnificent taught me most of life's important lessons. This book is an expression of my deep affection for your remarkable country. So I'd like to maybe close with a special note of gratitude for all the Ghanaians who are listening, or the Ghanaians in the Ghanaian American diaspora. And that I'm very glad that a long time ago, almost, I hate to say half a century ago, my path, my footsteps were able to alight in your remarkable country.
Oh, thank you so much. Those are very kind words. And talking about words, I know you use the term Omanhene, you use the term Obroni, and those are all Twi words. Do you speak any, are you fluent in Twi? Would you want to say something to validate your Ghanaian connection in some way?
Missy Tree Kakra Kakra.
Oh boy. Okay, Steve.
And I'm not Dadaba, just so you know. Because, you must have, but
You
I'm not.
sure sound like another bar. Anyways.
So, Metiasi Kakra.
All right, Steve. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. I've learned a lot from your life experiences and building this fabulous business from this concept. And I think for me, what really stood out again is that passion that you have and that deep connection with with Africa, with Ghana. And I think that I wish you continued success in your endeavor.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Albert. And thank you for sharing your students with me not so many months ago. It was really a great pleasure.
We enjoyed having you. We hope you will come back.
With pleasure. With pleasure. I'd love to. Okay. Thank you, Albert.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And we'll talk
again. Thank you.
You are listening to NIMDA Talk.